Hello history buffs and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chloe Eastwood. I'm a public historian and I'm currently in a Master's of Arts in Teaching program. And right now I have been watching a lot of videos. It turns out teachers love TED Talks. So I've been watching a lot of these for my program, and while most of them are insightful and interesting, I have found one that I think warrants a response. I have never done a response video before. I've done some reaction videos before, but this is my first time looking at somebody's good faith criticism of the social sciences as a field and taking, I think, a little bit of issue with it. So I'm going to try and be fair, balanced, represent their points appropriately. I will link down below so that you can check it out yourselves, but I think that there is something to be said here about what the social sciences are, what they do, what the purpose is, and what they absolutely are not. So we are going to be watching the end of social science as we know it with Brian Epstein through Tedx Sanford. So without further ado, let's check it out.
So let me take you back to the autumn of 2008, when the global financial system almost collapsed. Back in March, Bear Stearns had gone bankrupt, but people weren't really sure then whether that was a one-off event or whether it was foretelling something worse. Then in July, IndyMac, a huge mortgage bank, went under, and markets started to get nervous. By the middle of September, they were in full panic. On September 15th, Lehman Brothers collapsed, and the very next day, AIG had to be bailed out for $85 billion. Then on September 29th, the Dow fell 778 points. And so began a multi-year global depression that we're only now getting out of. It sure is a good thing we have 15,000 economists in the United States. You might have thought they could let us know this was coming. You might have thought they could have given us some policies for when it did arrive, but they didn't. Before the crisis, the greatest economists in the world didn't see it. When the crisis came, they bickered about what to do. And today, years later, they're still debating the fundamental causes. No wonder we don't have good policies in place for avoiding the next crisis. This represents a great failure of social science.
All right, so I'm going to actually stop right here and define some terms. I think that people generally think of social sciences as psychology and economics, and they tend to throw history in too for some reason, and this is really the crux of what I have a problem with here. History has kind of a funny relationship with what exactly is it, because on one hand, it's not exactly humanities because we're dealing with things, we're dealing with big data, we're dealing with facts, and we can have different studies. But then the flip side is, it's absolutely a humanities, because what are we but people? We are, and he's going to debunk this or he's going to argue against this, but we are the study of people and our past, and it's a very soft power kind of dynamic. We're studying what our story is and how we connect to our past. We contextualize ourselves. We find the way that we want to interpret the facts. These are the things that make up history. History is facts plus interpretation. Is it merely 40% or is it fully 40%? These are exactly the same fact but very different interpretation, and the way that we tell the story is going to impact who we side with, what we believe, and the way that we interpret the facts matters in a very soft political power kind of way. Lumping us in with economists and suggesting that we ought to be able to do the same things as economists, and suggesting that we ought to be able to do the same thing as harder social sciences, if you want to call history a social science at all, which nobody really has since the 60s and 70s, if you want to do this, you're going to set yourself up for failure, because that's not the point of history. History isn't supposed to be about predicting the future. History is about understanding the past and contextualizing the present, and maybe setting yourself up for building a better future, but it isn't to predict the future.
The social sciences are not working. Sociology, economics, political science, history.
Okay, and here they are. Sociology, political science, history, economics. Okay, I am only one of these fields, but I think that trying to lump them together with the same kinds of goals and criteria as hard sciences, which he's about to do, is going to set up all of these fields for failure in a way, because they have different goals. Not every field has the same goal.
We need good answers from these disciplines. Imagine what we could accomplish if we were actually good at social science. Imagine the crises we could avoid. Imagine the lives we could save.
Okay, and here he starts to catastrophize, saying that we are no good at the social sciences. He's saying that it's a failure of social sciences if we can't save people, if we can't predict the future, if we can't prevent catastrophes. There was an interesting court case a few years ago in Italian law where geologists had been unable to predict an earthquake, and people died, property damage. It was a whole to-do, and they were arrested because it was part of their job to be able to predict the future and to be able to tell what was coming and be able to prevent this sort of damage. And the law ended up siding with the geologists, saying this is not their purview. They do not have to, they don't have to be able to predict the future. So even with the hard sciences, this is not necessarily their goal, to predict the future. So if this isn't what we're holding the hard sciences to, why is this now the arbitrary goal of a discipline designed to understand how money flows, understand how nations interact with each other, and to understand what happened in the past and why it happened and what the implications are for our current narrative? So these are very different questions, and being good at those questions make us good at social sciences. Again, if you want to consider history a social science, which I don't really, but for the purposes of this video, I'll play along. It seems like an arbitrary standard that we are asking ourselves to hold social sciences to, since we don't even hold hard sciences to them.
Now, the thing about the social sciences is we spend a lot of time on how does it work questions. But what is it questions, we don't really do that. What is money? What is a company? What is an institution? What's a...
So he puts up this list, and it's about things that we ostensibly don't think about. But I can definitely think of histories and different projects, videos, essays, articles that have answered these questions. So when you say nobody has tackled what is money, that's not true. And I personally am very proud of my videos on things like lens and nostalgia, because they define phenomenon and metaphors rather than what you can do with them or what impact they have on history. So those are questions that are what is it questions. But I will say, and this is the big irony of this video, that Brian Epstein doesn't seem to have asked the question, what is history? What is political science? And he went right to, let's make it work like the hard sciences. So therein lies a great irony of this video, that without really considering what the strengths and the purposes are of these fields, you jump right into how to fix them, and you end up with fixes that don't make any sense and aren't productive to furthering our understanding of the humanities or of ourselves or what that relationship can yield.
Here's an interesting comparison. I had a research associate look at two of the top journals, one in the natural sciences and one in the social sciences, Nature and the American Economic Review. We looked at the 400 or so articles that came out over the last year and coded them in terms of what kinds of questions they were addressing, and here are the results. The blue bars represent Nature, and as you can see, about 16% of the articles in Nature are addressing purely what is it questions. And then another 12% are addressing a mix of questions.
So I'm not saying that he cherry-picked his data, because that is something different than this, but this is an extremely small sample size, and you don't get the full scope of what kind of questions you're asking from just one journal from each discipline.
Think about a body. There are lots of cells in the body, but lots of parts of the body are non-cellular as well. Think, for instance, about the eye. There are lots of cells in the retina or cells in the optic nerve, but most of the eye is non-cellular. The cornea has almost no cells. The lens, most of the eye is the vitreous humor, and that also has almost no cells. The eye is an amazing structural and functional device, and yet it's not made out of cells. And the same is true for lots of other parts of the body as well. The bones, 15% of the body. The hair, the teeth, all the fluids in the body. Virchow got the answer to the what is it question about the body wrong. It was too simple. It was too uniform. One more point about this. Suppose you want to use Virchow's answer to what is it questions to then answer how does it work questions. For instance, suppose you want to construct a simulation. And in this simulation of the body as a whole, you only simulate the cells, and you ignore or overlook all the non-cellular stuff. Well, this will not be a good simulation of the body. You might simulate a few things well. You might simulate, say, the muscles well, or you might simulate the organs well. But as a simulation of the body as a whole, it'll be terrible. I mean, you can probably predict what's going to happen. With a bad answer to what is it questions, we don't have a prayer of giving a good answer to how does it work questions.
Okay, so what I find so interesting about this segment is that he is comparing the very tangible questions that are answered in the hard sciences. I mean, these are disciplines based on observations and very true or false things. Like if you do physics bad, it's just wrong. And when you do social sciences badly, then they are debated on and debunked because you're dealing with ideas. That's where the soft is. That's where the social is. It's not a matter of true or false or let's adjust this. It's a matter of how are we framing ideas? How are we defining concepts? We're dealing with almost purely abstract ideas. Even when you're in history or economics and you're dealing with hard facts, you're still developing theories and philosophies in order to explain what's going on. And so it puts history in a very bad light when you compare it to something as hard science, as biology. When you say we ought to, I don't know, as an example, we ought to have a definitive answer on whether or not John Brown was mentally ill, when nobody alive today knew him, let alone psychoanalyzed him. And yet that has been part of a historical theory based on racist people who want to say that only a mentally ill white person would lead a raid on Harper's Ferry and want to help to emancipate black people in this country. Only a mentally ill white person, not, a person with a good moral compass, a mentally ill one. Okay, so as we see, we can come up with plausible or implausible explanations in history. We don't only have good ideas that ought to be taken seriously and debated on. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that the ideas that we come up with can't then be checked against easily observable phenomena. We do not know John Brown. We cannot get a clear bill of health from him because he is dead. And then the big difference between the hard sciences and the social sciences is how you run experiments. When you're dealing with social sciences, you're almost purely dealing with either conjecture or you're dealing with models based on things that have happened. He mentioned in the very beginning of this video that you have people still looking back 12 years and trying to figure out what happened in 2008 when really that's how we work. We work from our examples and we use our case studies and we study those things and we get as much information out of them as we can, and once we understand it, then we write our paper. So that's how it works. We can't, or it doesn't make as much sense to either one, destroy, in this case, destroy an economy just to see how it works. That's a bad experiment. Or two, try to predict what's going to happen based on models when we don't know what all the other stuff, and well, let's just watch the video, what he's about to say.
So I was talking to an economist the other day, and he was like, sure, society is built out of people, and these are the building blocks of our model, but what else is there? Are you suggesting that there's some sort of dark matter in the social world that we're not really representing? Some invisible stuff we can't see?
I've mentioned before that we have lots of different ideas and ways of looking at things that have happened, and this is the dark matter. If you want to call it dark matter, we have ideas of how power is diffused. If you want to read, for example, Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish, we have histories of how colonialism and power has been moved about in the world. We have ideas about economy and global commerce, and in addition to humans, we also have, we move around animals and diseases and ideas and social customs and norms and education and what does it mean to be oneself when one is moved out of one's own context? These are all questions that influence human behavior, especially in relation to other people. It's not going to be a one-to-one system because it's so much more than just those 2 people or those 100 people or those 100 million people. And that's something that historians absolutely take into account when we write our histories. It wouldn't be a very good history without this. So the point I'm making here is that just because historians do take these things into consideration doesn't mean that we're supposed to be able to predict the future. And that doesn't mean that we're bad at social sciences. It means that we are misunderstanding what social sciences are supposed to do.
What do we do when we encounter something like the financial crisis? We want to understand what happened. We want to understand how it works. But to understand that, we need to understand the mechanisms behind the parts of that. And in order to understand that, we need to understand what those parts are. This is something we have to take seriously, at least as seriously as we take DNA in the natural sciences. It's not that social scientists are blind. They can look around them and see that the world is a complicated place.
So that right there really puts it into perspective. Looking around and seeing that the world is a complicated place only shows you the concrete things. These are your formal operations. In order to be a really good social scientist, you need to go so much further than the concrete. You have to be able to think abstractly. You have to be able to conceptualize things that you cannot see. And it's not the only difference between the hard sciences and the humanities, but it is a distinction that almost everything that the humanities do is an abstraction, whereas so much of what the hard sciences do is concrete.
But what they're doing is they think that society is made exclusively out of people.
We don't.
And so it interacts with the other parts of the world. And so you can come up with this clean separation of society and people here, and then resources here, and firms here, and so on. But if you just take one glance at this complicated hierarchy, it's clear that couldn't possibly be right. There is no way of pulling out and separating the people in our models. Our approach to the social world overall is too centered on people. It's too people-centric, too anthropocentric.
So that's a really interesting thing that he brings up, is the anthropocentrism of how we do history, economics, political science, etc., when so much of these disciplines is entirely reliant on things like the environment. To name just one example, there are countries now which are facing rising tides, and they are going to have to either move or disperse because their country is literally disappearing. We're facing these environmental catastrophes in every single country right now, even ones that don't have their major cities on the coastline. And as historians, there are large subsections of environmental history where you look at the relationship between a people and the land as the land changes and our society changes around it. This was a big field in understanding the relationship between white settlers in the United States and the native people who lived there. The land kept changing around them, and their relationship to each other kept changing, and their relationship to the land kept changing. This is something that the environment has a big and active role in, and we wouldn't understand this if there hadn't been environmental historians, but fortunately there were.
500 years ago, Copernicus argued against anthropocentrism about the solar system. Before Copernicus, astronomers couldn't imagine a universe where people weren't right at the center. Those astronomers, of course, were proven wrong. We are part of the universe, but we are not at the center of the universe. Amazingly, 500 years later, the social sciences are still relying on a similar kind of assumption.
So this is really interesting to me because it shows again how the hard sciences are much more concrete in many ways than the social sciences. When you deal with things like, is the world the center of the universe? That's a true or false statement. But when it comes to a discipline which is all about contextualizing people within the context of people largely, other contexts as well, we do delve into those different ideas, but largely we are dealing with humans in a human context. What is our narrative? What is our legacy? What is our culture? How do we evolve as ourselves? And there is value in answering these questions. When you have questions like these, it makes all the sense in the world to answer anthropocentric questions. And so, again, he is misrepresenting the difference between the hard sciences and the social sciences or the humanities.
But this is not the way it has to be. We don't have to labor under the dogmas of an earlier generation. All we need to do is take the what is it questions even half as seriously in social science as we do in the natural sciences, and we have the potential to make some real progress. Here are some steps we can take. First, we have to recognize the problem. There is no way that we're going to improve this stuff until we see that what is it questions are important and that we're not addressing them well. Also, critical is to go beyond just thinking about psychology. Lots of people are thinking about how to fix the social sciences, but by and large, the way they're doing it is by improving our models of the human psyche.
So it's interesting that he brings up psychology. I forgot that he did that because, see, my earlier point about history and psychology, that you actually cannot psychoanalyze people who are already dead. You can make guesses, But if you did not sit down with that person, if you are not a licensed therapist and you did not sit down with this person, maybe you're a time traveling psychotherapist, you cannot diagnose a person. And something that I actually have noticed, and I will absolutely stand with him on this point, something that I've noticed in history generally is that people try and psychoanalyze a population. This is not possible. A population cannot have a psychological diagnosis. If anything, you can maybe make a sociological guess, but again, you actually have to have training in order to do this. So for that extent, I will agree with him.
Let me conclude by saying that this is not something that we're going to solve in a day or a week or a month. It's an ongoing project in social science, just as it is in natural science. But even if we can make small strides little by little, it can have an enormous impact. The stakes are huge in the social sciences, and if we can start making improvements, we just might find that after years and years and years of effort, that we can finally draw on the social sciences to solve some of the most pressing problems of our time. Thank you.
So we hear his call to action, and it's very much we need to fix the social sciences, and we need lots of different disciplines to help us fix it. And I think that to the extent that we are trying to model specific things, sure, absolutely, we can make independent interdisciplinary studies that don't necessarily overhaul the entirety of a different field. I think that that is, an appropriate call to action. I don't think that the rest of his presentation leading up to that point necessarily supports it. I think that if he wants to argue for needing to make better models to predict economic catastrophe and bringing different disciplines together, that is a great idea. But I don't think that he's looking into the strengths of the different disciplines, and I don't think that this is going to be beneficial in the long run to try and make different disciplines into what he wants them to be in order to utilize them for the goals that he is trying to chase. In all, I wanted to make this video because I think that people misunderstand what history is and what it isn't. When I watch this video, I think that he has some good ideas, but I don't think that he understands what the social sciences are about. And he also, I think, wrongly clumps history in with the rest of the social sciences and tries to hold it account for something that it isn't and cannot do. And that's why I want to make this video. It's because I think that it's important to understand what history is, what it's capable of doing, what we should expect from it, and what it can be used for. And as he says in the very end, history can be used as a way to provide data and provide information and case studies for a model. It absolutely can do this. History is made up of lots of different case studies, and that's exactly where its strong suit is. But everything leading up to that point implies that it ought to be understood and utilized differently than it is set up to function. And I think that that is a problem if we understand history as a way of seeing the future. History is a way of understanding the past and contextualizing the present. And that's going to do it for this video. I hope that you comment down below with your thoughts on either his presentation or my reaction to it. Again, this is my first reaction video, so let me know what you liked and disliked and what you want to see out of my next video. And don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed yourself, and subscribe so I'll see you in the future. And until next time, make history.